Dear all, now for the plenary session for which we are heading to is very important, as we do have with us some very eminent people who have been the champions in their field and hold so many accolades in this industry. They have been front runners in the innovations, academics, policy making, decision making, and many more. After all, they rightly say that real leaders are not concerned with being famous. They are concerned with making a difference. So as we gear up to meet such leaders, I would like to invite all of you for this panel discussion that's being titled as the Innovation Game, Policies and Framework to Foster Talent and Technology for a Sustainable, Inclusive, Socio-Economic Growth. Here we have with us, and in fact, we are very proud to have with us Dr. R.S. Sharma, sir, the CEO, National Health Authority and head of Empowered Group on COVID vaccinations and former Chairman-TRAI. He will be our session chair. An IAS officer with over 40 years of experience, ladies and gentlemen, in public administration. He's also been the DG and Mission Director of Aadhaar program and has served as the Chief Secretary of Jharkhand. He has been deeply involved in the areas of e-governance and is credited with introducing IT systems in the area of public service delivery, such as the government treasuries, public grievances, office automation, land reforms, urban governance, tax reforms, transport systems, and so much more. Indeed, it would be an honor to be joined by Dr. R.S. Sharma, sir, right in a bit. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, our next seasoned discussant of the plenary session is Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthi, the Director of IIT Madras. An alumnus of IIT Madras and University of California, Professor Ramamurthi has been working with his alma mater since 1986 and took over as its director in the year 2011. Well, his areas of specialization, if we talk about, are communications and signal processing. His research work is in wireless networks, modulation, wireless data, audio and video compression. Well, he's also the honorary director of the Center of Excellence in Wireless Technology, a public-private initiative at the IITM Research Park, and a fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering and Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer, IEEE. Sir, it would be an honor to be joined by you as well. Thank you for taking the time out and joining us. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, next up, I would be very happy to be greeting on the screen Professor Soumitra Dutta, the founder of Global Innovation Index, with a good round of applause. Well, he is a professor of management and the former founding dean of the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University, New York. Well, Professor Dutta is an authority on innovation in the knowledge economy that you and I are part of. With a refreshing global perspective throughout his distinguished career, he has focused and in fact had a laser sharp focus on how to drive business innovation and growth through the right combination of innovative people and technology at the same time. Well, he is the co-editor and author of the Global Information Technology Report, published by the World Economic Forum and the Global Innovation Index. Well, with that, Professor Dutta, we would like to welcome you as well. And with that, it's over to all you sirs on board with us.
Evening, friends, and in this particular session we are going to sort of discuss an extremely important topic, and that topic will be topic of innovation. Now, innovation obviously has multiple meanings, multiple dimensions in multiple sectors. So it's very difficult to bind that in a particular definition. The only broad characteristics of innovation can be that somehow innovation could be called some invention which actually seeks to solve people's problem or seeks to do things in a completely new manner. So this is a very vague kind of definition, but nevertheless, I have tried to say it in just one line. I am familiar with the innovation in the bureaucratic setup of this country. I have been a part of bureaucracy since last about 40 to 43 years. And bureaucrats are supposed to be absolutely anti-innovation. They are the guys who are slothy, who are not really, who are very slow, rule-bound. They will not go out of any rules, etc. So typically, bureaucrats' image in a person is an image of a person who doesn't understand what is innovation and who kind of the lakir ka fakir type of characters they are kind of called. However, there are certain sort of people in bureaucracy also, and the latest trends in the last 15-20 years has been that while we may not be great innovators, but we certainly want to collaborate and cooperate with innovators so as to create better solutions for our people. We also have realized that in certain spaces we can do a lot of good things, and one of the such spaces is use of information and communication technology. And I have been one of those persons who have been a passionate believer that India's hard problems, many of these hard problems can be solved by technological innovations and technological interventions. And that, to that extent, I think India has done a considerable amount of work in this space, especially ICT. And I will only, for the next couple of minutes, I'll only talk about some of these ICT related innovations. So one is that we created, let's say about 10 years back, we created an artifact called Aadhaar, the digital identity. So people in traditional identity systems essentially were having certain identity cards, or they were having certain documents like passports or other social security numbers in United States. But India actually embarked on a completely different artifact, which is a digital artifact, which is an online cardless, just a number. And that number was pluggable. It's a foundational identity which we created, and it is pluggable to any domain of transaction, which means that you can, using this identity, open a bank account, get a mobile SIM, get money transferred into your account through direct benefit transfer. So I think this was one of the major innovations which we embarked upon. And interestingly, we completed 1.3 billion, Aadhaars in a record time of about 5.5 years. This is the largest digital system which is scaled to 1 billion in such a short time. So I think that's where we did. And then we again went into what is called the UPI, the Unified Payment Interface. And that, the transactions recorded in UPI in the month of January 2021, exceeded 4 billion transactions. So it is actually a phenomenal success. And we have realized that for innovations to succeed in our country, they have got to be frugal, they have got to be cost effective, they have got to be based on open technology, open standards, they have got to be interoperable. And if you satisfy a very diverse kind of audience, then you have to have scalable innovations going on speed, and then of course multilingual goes without saying. So these are some of the things which we have done, and I think in the space of technology we have used some very interesting ideas to simplify the administrative processes, which I am familiar with. Of course, I am also familiar with telecom, for example, as a regulator, and we created what is called the blockchain technology was leveraged to ensure that we have the unsolicited commercial communications are checked. So, and of course, other stuff also, the net neutrality principles, which of course is not an innovation, but at least we created a rule-based system which essentially ensured that the internet remains an open platform for innovation. And that was possible only when you could have the net neutrality principles. So I think I'll stop with that, and I'll invite now Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthi. So I will request, and of course he has been in this space, telecommunication space, for a long time, so I will, and also the interesting part is the 5G standards which are coming now are actually, Professor Ramamurthi has contributed tremendously in that part. And I think if that gets finally adopted and accepted, it will be a real proud moment for all of us because of you, Professor Ramamurthi. So I'll request you now to kindly go ahead and provide your thoughts on this important issue of innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Thank you very much, and greetings to all the viewers and listeners, subscribers of Voice and Data. I'm indeed grateful to the organizers and the of Voice and Data for both recognizing my work and as well as giving me this opportunity to participate in this very important panel discussion with luminaries sharing the stage. This topic of innovation for India is a very, very important one. Particularly because we are discussing this and setting the stage for innovation to explode at a time when the country needs it the most. This is we know all the key words, the demographic dividend, the 20-25 years that we have to make India a middle income or even better country, and the implications it will have for the people of this country, and I dare say for the world, if we get it right, and also the serious implications if we don't get it right. So innovation is going to be very important. And I'm not going, I really I thank Mr. Sharma for setting the stage, because if there's one area in which innovations have shown what they can do for the country and how innovative we can be as a country in the last decade or so, it has been in the space of information technology as applied to the lives of the people. All the examples he gave, and there are more, really make all the difference. When you see, I have grown up in a time when common people in this country, vegetable vendors, traders, did not even know how to use a phone. In fact, I always share this funny story when somebody was watching me use a landline phone and asked, one of the vendors asked me, "Sir, how do you make a missed call on that device?" They realized that you can't make a missed call on that device. So in India, missed calls play a very important role. So, people have never used, most of the people who are using phones in the country today have never used a landline phone. And and to have taken such a population to the point where they are doing 4 billion transactions a month, paying each other for tailoring, for all kinds of things, using UPI, using their ID to actually receive very important benefits, as for the most vulnerable people, as we saw during the pandemic. It's incredible. And I think a lot of people understand that the internet, IT, information technology, and including new emerging technologies like blockchain, are all going to play a big role, and they're seeing it happen. So I think that's a no-brainer. And I would say the whole IT space, starting in the 80s when India took its steps to become a strong IT player globally, I think the stage was set, and it's not surprising that this is an area in which innovations have burst out quickly, and it's also an area which shows that what innovations can do for the country. And imagine where we would be today if we didn't have any of these things. I think that is the point to understand. If we did not have the Aadhaar, how would we have reached all the people with the few thousands of rupees that was critical for them when the lockdown happened? How would we enable all these small traders and others to, get over the friction of getting paid? In India, getting paid for services rendered is not a trivial thing, as those who are in business know. How would we have done that? So it's really what it means to the country and to the emerging demographics and this window of opportunity. I think it's very clear. But I want to step beyond that and talk about how it's going to be it's very important for us to somehow enable innovations to explode and happen across the board. The thing here is that if you just, let me also take a 1 minute to just say what is innovation. I come from an education institution. We do research all the time. Many of my faculty and other researchers also do innovation. So innovation usually comes from a deep experience, a depth of experience in the matter you're dealing with, where you see that there are pain points, there are significant improvements possible, either in the product or in the process, the manufacturing process, for example, that can lead to improvement in product efficiency, reduction in cost, better service, better energy efficiency, whatever. And usually it's born out of that kind of a deep understanding that comes from having dealt with that product or process or issue for a long time. And research is very different. Sometimes you discover a new material, you discover a new law, that is very different. But of course, researchers also become very deeply knowledgeable about something that they've been working with for years. So researchers also innovate. But that's fairly straightforward. We all keep hearing all the time how somebody has innovated on a material and improved its performance, how somebody has innovated on a manufacturing process and reduced the improved the greenness of the process and so on. But there are a whole lot of others who are also very familiar with something that they are doing. Carpenters, plumbers, and all kinds of people providing services, people making things, who also can innovate. They have deep knowledge of the pain points. They have deep knowledge of what is really would be nice to do, nice to achieve, nice to get overcome. And how do we enable that? How do we enable all these people, thousands and tens of thousands and lakhs of them all over the country in different disciplines, farmers, how do we enable them to innovate? And how do we make those innovations bubble up? This is really the key challenge, because if you just step out in our country, if you go to a small workshop, if you go to a construction site where a small building is being built, or even a large building for that matter, if you go anywhere, you will see, if you spend some time, you will see so many things that are being done in a not so nice manner, making do with some tools that are not very suitable, taking risks in the way it's done, quality of the work not coming out, depending a lot on the individual, depending a lot on the individual's knowledge, ability, focus. So many, you can see, if you just go anywhere, you'll see this. You can see this in small workshops, factories. You can see this on the road. Our road furniture, how they are built. You can see it in public utilities. Taps that are either not fit for the job and therefore break very quickly, or taps. The only taps that are fit for the job are really 200 or 150-year-old design. They are very good, but one really wants better features from them, and one is not able to get them. You can ask the railways about the difficulty in replacing the tap in the wash basin in the coach. The old ones are absolutely bulletproof and robust, and anything else you put which is similar to the ones you have in the homes and offices, it won't last 2 trips of the coach. So there are all these issues. Now, how do you enable that kind of innovation? Countries like Japan have thrived on that kind of innovation. How do we enable that? That is really the key that I think we have to address. And I think IT can play a very big role in that. The e-marketplace is a very important way in which good innovations can bubble up and be available across the board. If there are plumbers all over the country, how do you reach them? Well, even if they are dispersed all over the country, the e-marketplace is a good way to reach them, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to take any more time at this point, but this is really where I believe we have to focus. And if we enable Indians of all shades and ages, different educational attainments, doesn't matter. What matters is their depth of understanding of the job they are doing, of the work they are doing, of the product they are making, of the process they are involved in, or of this solution they are providing. Because they will have improvements that can be made and should be made. And to enable them to do that and benefit from that. Financial benefit is one thing, through sales, improved sales and improved business. But it's equally important that they get recognized. I believe, and this is a conjecture of mine, that I believe a lot of innovation in India does not happen because many people don't have the confidence to go out and say that I think I can do this better. I think recognizing those who do this well, giving a pat on the back, blowing the trumpet itself is going to be very important. And of course, you have to do it for the right ones. You can't do it for the ones that are premature and don't work. If you do that, then people will get the courage to innovate. People will get the courage to say, come forward and say that I think this can be done in a better way. Though it's been done this way for 50 years. And here's the tool for that. Or here's the new way you should do it. Here's the modified design. Here's the different process for making it, and so on and so forth. So I would like to request everybody to think a lot about how to make this. Sometimes people call this grassroots innovation, but it's okay. I mean, whatever you want to call it. But I think innovation across the board is really what I'm looking for. That kind of explosion, which looks like place has gone crazy. Thank you very much. I'll stop here at this point. We'll see later.
Thank you, Professor Ramamurthi, for a wonderful sort of introduction to the subject. And I think the last few sentences which you spoke are extremely important from a country's perspective. One is that we should have the confidence of the country that we can create extremely innovative, frugal, interoperable, scalable solutions in this country. I think that's very important, because I think we have had the lack of confidence has been one of the major factors for inhibiting us from going and innovating, number one. And number two, I completely agree that the innovators need to be promoted, need to be provided the kind of support which may not be necessarily financial support always, but as a support for confidence, support saying that yes, you are doing fine, we can do it. And unfortunately, that again, is the corollary of the first part, which is the lack of confidence. So somehow we think that, this fellow from Europe, he must have done something really worthwhile. But this guy from, Chennai, this guy from, Muzaffarpur is not the guy who is capable of doing this. How can he do it? He's living in a remote area of Muzaffarpur and not living in some sophisticated place. So I think that is something which we need to change. Fortunately, India has changed, and we now have confidence in almost all major aspects. The latest pandemic, when we have these vaccines, the capacity and the capacity to actually manufacture many of these things, the ventilators and other kinds of things which were not there in our country, in a very short time, in a very quality products which we are doing. In telecommunications, as you may be knowing, the handset manufacturing has picked up so much. Electronics manufacturing is going on, and so that confidence is actually coming in. I'm sure. I think we need to have a very systematic approach towards building the confidence, towards building that innovation ecosystem, and towards supporting all those who are involved in this. So also thank you, Professor Ramamurthi. Now I'll invite Professor Soumitra Dutta of Cornell. He is an IIT Delhi alumni, and he is the founder of Global Innovation Index and founding dean of Cornell SC Johnson College of Business. And he has been in this space of in this research area of innovation and other related things. So I am sure he will also provide us great insights into this whole issue. So I invite you now, Professor Dutta. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, and very warm welcome to all our viewers also. And thank you, Professor and Director Ramamurthi, also for your comments. I enjoyed listening to both of you, because both of you are very eminent personalities. You've achieved a lot. And certainly, I think you represent in many ways the best of Indian talent. I think that's a very important indication of what India can actually produce and achieve. One of my own interests in technology innovation really is reflected in this piece of work called the Global Innovation Index. And this is something that I started about in 2007, so about 14 years ago. And then in 2011, it was adopted by the United Nations. WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization, adopted it. And today it has been published by WIPO each year. So I co-edit the report every year. And that has become like a global benchmark for assessing innovation policy, innovation strategy around the world. Most countries, almost every country in the world uses it, including India. And Niti Aayog, for example, has use the Global Innovation Index to roll out the India Innovation Index, which is much more of a state level measurement of state level innovation measures. So I have been working in this area of innovation assessment, innovation benchmarking for 15 years now. And I just thought I'll share with the audience out here some overall results or some high level observations. So given that we're just coming out of the pandemic, one of the questions which has been asked often to us is what's going to happen with innovation in the post-pandemic world? And as part of the Global Innovation Index, we have been collecting data about R&D expenditure. And R&D is, of course, only one component of innovation, but is an important component. And what we have seen is something changed in the last crisis that we had. The last crisis was the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And historically, till that time period, the rate of growth in R&D roughly paralleled the rate of growth in GDP. And then since 2009, what we have seen in the last 10 years really is a divergence where the rate of growth in R&D has actually been higher than the rate of growth of the GDP. So the pandemic came, and of course, a lot of things changed for many industries. And now a very good question mark really is what will happen to R&D and innovation going forward. If you look at the global R&D expenditures, almost 75% of the global R&D spend is done in 4 sectors. So one sector is the ICT hardware and telecoms. Another sector is pharmaceuticals. The third sector is automobiles. And the fourth sector is software services. So if you combine these 4 services or 4 sectors, you have almost 75% of global R&D spend. And if you look at what has happened in the last 12 months is that the amount of investment, the amount of innovation in IT services and in many of these electric vehicles and so on has only increased, it hasn't decreased. Now, it is true that many other sectors that have been hit quite badly because of the pandemic, let's say, for example, hospitality, travel, tourism, do not historically use technology or innovate a lot. But what is becoming increasingly clear is that the companies that will emerge as winners from this turmoil that is going through in these sectors will probably have to be very technology intensive. So it is quite likely that despite the short-term crisis that we've all faced and the reduction and redirection of government expenditure in many cases, the amount of, let's say, the rate of growth of innovation, most people expect it to accelerate in the years ahead. So I think a lot of innovation will happen. And in many ways, the pandemic will force us to look at things differently. Now, another important question that is often posed to us is, okay, look, you have studied innovation across countries, across the years. What are some high-level differentiators? So what actually differentiates the successful companies, successful organizations, successful countries from the less successful countries? And there actually what we see is an interesting trends happening. So one is, if you look at by income group and you ask the question, which countries are overachieving for the income group peers? So at the same income level, which countries are overachieving? And by the way, India is an overachiever. So India is an innovation achiever. What we are finding is that there are very interesting cases of innovation overachievers appearing in parts of the world that we would not expect. Africa, for example, we find the largest concentration of innovation achievers. Countries that are outperforming their peers. Countries like Rwanda, Madagascar, Malawi, and others that typically most people would not think as innovation hotspots. But the message really out there, what we're seeing in the research is that innovation is being driven in economies around the world, including in sub-Saharan Africa. So you're seeing hope in many parts of the world. Now, if you actually try and compare across income group categories and say, okay, what are some things that high income countries do better, the ones that are innovating more? What are some things that low income countries do better, that innovate better? You find interesting results. So if you look at the low income countries in general, the good countries that are innovating further, faster, and better are the ones that typically tend to have stronger institutions, so stronger rules and laws about political, about regulatory, about IP, other issues, and also tend to have an open market environment. So good market sophistication, good for trading. A lot of the innovation actually happens in low income economies by enabling trade. So the more you trade, the more, in fact, to bring in new ideas, and the more strong institutions you have, the more you're actually able to build those ideas into the country. If you look at the high-income economies, which high-income economies are doing better than others, and the results are actually quite clear. It is those economies that are using information technology more intensively, because most high-income economies already have the basic institutional infrastructure present, the basic education present, but not all of them are using ICT intensively. So the countries that are using technology intensively are the ones that are doing better. And in this context, even though India is not a high-income economy, India is an exception because India is in the low economy group, but in fact, India has great technology strengths, as I mentioned earlier. So I think what you see is that technology can be a huge driver of innovation in economies. Now, the third point that I just want to close with is the whole idea of human capital. And we all know that for innovation, the core is really the quality of human talent that you have and you're able to develop in a country. Now, like my colleague, Professor Ramamurthi, I have spent a number of years in academia. And if I compare my experience, I've been a professor in Europe, I've been a professor in America, I've been a professor also as a visiting professor in India. If I compare my experience and look and ask the question, why is it that, 15, 17 of the top 20 universities are American? And why not from other parts of the world? And my own analysis after having lived and worked across different geographies is that American universities tend to benefit from three factors that enables them to be excellent. And this ultimately leads to that kind of overall innovation in the people. The first one is very simple. You're allowed to actually compete for talent, compete for faculty, compete for PhD students, compete for students. And this is something which you're not able to do easily in India or in Europe, where often the salaries are set, by some government structure, the people are often government employees, and you're just unable to, in fact, offer that kind of differentiation in terms of compensation, in terms of remuneration as required. So American universities are much more flexible and much more able to compete. Second, what you see is a very strong link to industry. I know that IIT Madras, for example, is very well known for its link to industry, and that is improving in India. But clearly, I think that's an area where much more can be done because the link to industry is extremely important. And the more we are able to provide a strong link to industry, that actually enables a lot of success. If you think about, a top, let's say Silicon Valley, which is one of the, most important spots for technology innovation, the value that comes from having a great university like Stanford is not necessarily the IP produced by the professors at Stanford. Yes, they're great professors and they produce some good research papers, but that is not the prime source of wealth creation and innovation in the Bay Area. What is, in fact, the best source is all the great graduates of Stanford University who are educated and well-versed in research and who are, in fact, going out after graduating from Stanford and creating all these wonderful companies and new technologies. Why? Because they have spent the education in research while at Stanford. And I think what needs to happen much more in Indian universities is You need to have industry investing in research much more. And a lot of the central government research funds are today often channeled through the central government sort of research institutions, not through universities. In contrast, in America, a lot of the research money is funded through the research universities in collaboration with companies. So that, I think, is the second thing. And the last thing really is a much more active role of the alumni in the governance of the school. Alumni are big donors and they give a lot of money to US universities, not because they're generous and not because Americans like to give, is because they actually control the school. The chairman of my university, Cornell, is a alumnus of Cornell, is a banker who now is the chair of the entire university. The chair decides, the president decides what actually happens in the university. The board of trustees is all alumni of the university. They actually control, so they give because they actually control, they can influence the institution. Now, let me stop out there, but I think what I'm just trying to sort of communicate is that you need to restructure and reform the educational system to create excellence. And I think that's very important also in India, because that's the only way to, in fact, create the kind of human talent which we have so much human talent inside the country that we should benefit more from. So let me stop out there, and we may have lost a moderator because of technical issues. So I don't know how, Professor Ramamurthi, how we both can perhaps continue out here, but perhaps, you may want to just respond to some things that, you may have heard. Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think, what you said is spot on, particularly with regard to innovation at the high end, especially innovation that flows from education institutions, and so on. And that, I think at several institutions in the country, we have sort of figured out we figured out that there is a method to it, and there is a secret sauce, and and while it is true that some of the ingredients that would really unleash the forces, such as the ability to compete without hindrance, some of those constraints would, at least we have to assume they'll remain for some time. But still, there are many things that we can do, and that's what we have discovered and we are doing. And there's no doubt in my mind that what you've said about innovation, startups particularly that are coming out of these institutions, not just IIT Madras, of course, but any other IIT or even other institutions now. In fact, we are now engaged in an exercise to try to grow our startup ecosystem 10 times by actually partnering with a whole lot of other institutions, where we think we'll be able to actually, enable the capable innovators there to bubble up. So I think the educational institutions as a route for innovation, what you said, those are absolutely they've come out from your study of 15 years, and they're absolutely on the ball. But I think the thing about India, which I was trying to get at, is that we're a very huge country, and there are a lot of people whose education institution is not an institution, but it's actually the job. There are people who learn on the job. There are people who learn from experience. You meet people all the time whose credentials are very ordinary, or in fact non-existent, but who are absolutely experts in what they're doing. How do we enable these people to innovate? Now, traditionally, credentials are the first step. So how do you enable the uncredentialed but capable to innovate? And how do you enable those innovations to be discovered, to be able to be applauded, and to actually become successful? This is a challenge that we have, and because for various reasons, that's how it's going to be for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Even if the education institutions' role become larger and larger, the country is so huge, and this demographic, the current demographic, a good part of the really innovative, really capable part of this demographic will be uncredentialed. How do we enable that? So it's really about creating the right environment for those who are creative, those who understand a problem, as I said, deeply, and know what has to be done. Farming is a very good example, and weaving and other things. enable these youngsters and people, not necessarily youngsters, but whoever who's really knowledgeable about, deeply knowledgeable about what they're doing, to actually come forward and suggest, make improvements, benefit from those financially, but as I said, more equally important, get applauded, get recognized, and thereby send a clear message that we, as a country and globally, that your work is important, it's needed, and if it will be applauded, it will be used. There are enormous, as I said, literally in this country, you can step out on anything, on the road, in the train, on a construction site, as I said, or you can buy a product and when you try opening the package and, I'm not saying buying an Apple phone, but buy something else, which is fairly commonplace, but maybe somewhat, homegrown or something, and you open it, and even there's so many things you see that cry out for innovation, and people know. I think there are people who know what has to be done, except that they need to be enabled. This is very important because the innovation at the top will happen, and I think it should happen. And many of the things you said are key for that. And I think many from Niti Aayog down, I think this is being recognized and steps are being taken. But I think innovation at the bottom, innovation across the board is also something that will add bulk. And as Mr. Sharma was also saying, it actually also plays a very important role in confidence building, in a certain attitude change. And that is very important. So I would say, India is probably a huge place for food delivery, for example. I know food delivery happens all over the world, but it's growing in India by leaps and bounds. And so food is very different here. Yes, people do order pizzas here also, but there's so much Indian food, and Indian food is very different. Packaging requirements. I'll tell you. I just give an example. I think it's an unsolved problem. How do you package the 5 or 6 items that go with an order for idlis? Right? They put the sambar in plastic bags right now with rubber band. It's terrible. Okay. All the other solution is so expensive and so unsustainable, using a lot of plastic, and right. So there are lots of unsolved problems in this whole space. And I'm sure some food delivery people who have been doing this, working with these things, have ideas. So, but they're not coming out with the ideas right now. They've all been told to shut up, and just, do their work and go. So, and they have no way to actually realize their ideas. And there are innumerable examples. You can order a pizza in this country and get a good delivery, but you can't order idlis or forget dosas. Dosas are impossible. Nobody solved the problem, right? Yeah. So how do you order these things and get a good delivery? This is an unsolved problem. I'm just giving you one example, but it's there all over the place. And
no, I think there's so many examples, and I think you touched upon a very important theme, that you have to be able to enable the people, enable everyone. Innovation happens en masse and across the country, and I'm sure someone will find a way to package dosas and package sambar properly in the food delivery cycle. One of the questions which I would like to maybe ask you is, and by the way, Dr. Sharma, I've been told, had to leave because there was an urgent call from the ministry regarding the Covaxin program, which he's leading, which is very important. So the apologies from the organizers for that. But you have worked a lot in telecoms, so this is something which is very core to your own expertise. And so one of the questions is, what steps should India take to, in fact, help India become a hub for telecom equipment supply?
Yeah. So, I think it's not just, innovation is one big important piece of the puzzle. As we know, in the area of telecom and IT, there have been so many innovations. So many people have come out with brilliant ideas. The peak of that, of course, is epitomized by the Apple iPhone and so on. But that's not the only thing, right? The entire ecosystem is required. You can't, even if you have a great idea to something to replace the Apple iPhone, you need a huge ecosystem to realize the idea. And some of this has to do with also when you get onto the bus. If you miss the bus for a very long time, it becomes much harder. So electronics, which of course underpins telecom a lot, is something where if you go to the history, India missed a lot of buses, some knowingly, some unknowingly. And so there are huge challenges in addressing the issue that you raised about how do we become a player in the global supply chains. for telecom equipment. And I think in the last 3-4 years, some steps have been taken. And it's a complex problem because it goes all the way from semiconductors to new products, to assembly, to market, to standards, to IP. It's very complicated, and the controlling, the administrative or the you might say governance structures that govern all these areas span many ministries, and therefore you run into the interministerial silo-based friction also. That is part of India's governance structure. So you run into any enormous number of challenges. But I think we have what we learned from the last 3-4 years is that it can begin to be addressed if you turn the line. And it's also extremely private sector driven. This is one vertical where almost public sector plays no role. Government plays only a governance role, very important governance role, but no other role. On the other hand, if you take space or nuclear technology, there's so much denial of technology there that the public sector plays a big role in all countries in those areas. So this is a very different area, but the experience has shown that if you turn the right levers in the right sequence, coordinating across many ministries, magic happens very fast. India went from being almost zero manufacturer of assembler of phones to 99% of the phones being sold in the country being assembled here. It's not a big deal. It's assembly, but still it's a big deal. Okay. And now they're tweaking other levers to actually increase the value addition. But then, so you have to do all of this before you can even think of innovating. Because once you have this ecosystem, somebody may come and say, "I think I have a better way of, making this phone that at least for Indians, something that's very big, been a big pain point is being addressed," or something like that. And then you can go to one of these manufacturers and you can say, "Look, what about this idea?" And you have some chance of doing it. Otherwise, how do you go and implement your idea in China or Taiwan, right? So I think some things are beginning to happen, but it has to go back all the way, right? Finally, the biggest value in these products is in the IP that's in it. And so that's the end. Of course, many of us started working on that 15 years ago. That's because that's the only end in which some of us could do anything on. But we knew all along that it's like building the 5th floor without the foundations in the basement. And so, but now things are beginning to fall into place. And I think when the ecosystem builds up to the point where actually we are probably not very long away, very far away from that, where new IP can actually be incorporated into these products. So what Professor Dr. Sharma was referring to, the enhanced 5G that we have got out of India, which ITU has approved, what's called 5G-I, which has a few enhancements over the global 5G and is done in such a way that the two can be absolutely seamless. And it can actually provide, most importantly, it can provide enhanced coverage in rural areas in India. And it can be done without increasing the cost of the phones. It can be done without increasing the cost of the equipment. But since we are just these very early days in which phones are just beginning to be assembled here, there's still a lot of stuff that goes into the phone that comes from elsewhere, and the global supply chains in this area are extremely intricate, and as you know, and involve several continents and several trips across continents before a phone is made out. I think we have to cross all those hurdles to make all this happen, but it is possible. And I think all the way from IP down to the actual physical innovations in products, to actual products being made and sold in the country, I think the pieces are falling into place. At the end of the manufacture, assembly, and maybe even some increasing value addition, more and more of the parts being made here is already a done deal, or is happening very fast. I think the IP is now we are now making efforts to get some good IP in wherever it makes sense. And only then after that, you can even think of fabs and others. I mean, otherwise, fab is like, is like a pie in the sky without not to talk about ground floor to fourth floor not being busy. You just can't do it. I mean, fabs and makes sense only when you have the entire ecosystem. And of course, to build a fab and to get it all done takes many years. So you've got to start early. You've got to see, like a bat which attacks its prey. You've got to sort of, or a cat that you have to sort of know what's going to happen 4 years from now and start the planning for the fab. So it's one of the probably most complex areas where India has to go from point A to point B. It requires an orchestration in the government and in the markets at a very sophisticated level, so that we can overcome the problems created by our missing so many buses. in the past.
Well, India has always had a history of leapfrogging successfully, and I think the way
So
we have,
I think it'll happen, but
yeah.
it is probably one of the most complex. I would say the auto industry was also complicated. That's what gives me confidence. The auto industry, we had Ambassador and Fiat, right? And we had till 91, and we had nothing else. And yet today India has a thriving auto industry where it's not just that the cars are made here, but there's a lot of local IP in the cars, a lot of value addition in India, and cars are exported. And there's a fair amount of global IP coming in, global products coming in, but that's the way it'll be. Supply chains are all going to be global. Now, it's not going to be all made here. And then the slope is always in the positive direction. There's more and more innovation coming out of here. There's more and more value addition coming out of here. And I think the electric vehicle space is already seeing products that are coming with huge amount of IP and value that actually came from India and being manufactured in India. So our own startup, Ether Energy, is a very good example of that. So I think that the auto industry in the span of 30 years has gotten to where it is. And, 7.4% of Indian GDP, 12% including indirect, and a lot of scope for innovation. That gives me hope. I mean, and that also, we had missed a lot of buses. We just kept with Fiat and Ambassador for 40 years, right? So I think it's doable. This requires the orchestration for the electronic space is a little more complicated because electronics has no weight, no mass. And so things can be really made wherever it's 1 cent more efficient, right? Unlike automotive. So some of the boundary conditions in electronics are much even harder than in the case of automotive. But otherwise, it can be done. And I think we are going to do it. We're going to get it done, but it's taking more effort.
I think on that positive note, actually, I've been requested by the organizers to try and summarize and bring the session to a close. I think for me, what I pick up from listening to Dr. Sharma, you, and even some of my own views, is that, as you said, we can do it, and India has done it in many different areas. So a lot of optimism. I think the success of Aadhaar, of UPI, and the whole JAM system and so on that has happened in the last very rapid 10 years and less than 10 years, and today India is second largest home of telecom and mobile users, and almost 700 million in the entire country, shows that India can move quickly. And today, I think, given the right kind of policy environment, the right kind of coordination across private sector, across the government, I think we can make tremendous progress. So I personally am very optimistic that the next few years will be actually very bright in terms of telecoms, in terms of innovation, in terms of improving people's lives with the help of technology. And certainly what I do hope is that our audience, who are leaders in the space, a mix of private and government sources, will play important roles because, it's a collective effort. All of us have to play our own bring our own contribution to the table to be able to make the entire system work. And so I think, thank you very much, Professor Director Ramamurthi. I think we thank Dr. Sharma, who had to leave, and thank the organizers for organizing this panel innovation. Innovation is critical for a country's future. It's the best way to be competitive, to create wealth. And I certainly hope that India will continue on this path in a very strong and able manner in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dutta, for so seamlessly slipping into the role of the chairperson of this meeting. I didn't even realize it. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.